You're watching Success Insiders, hosted by Rebecca
and Liv.
Today's special guest is David Crowley, who is the founder of Social Capital in Woburn. Now you can introduce yourself.
All right, yes. Hi, I'm David Crowley, founder and president of Social Capital Inc. here in Woburn. We serve the greater Boston area, and I look forward to the conversation.
We also. So this company started way back in June of 2002. What inspired you? Was there any event or something else?
Yeah, sure. It was a couple of things. So I grew up in Woburn, went to Woburn High. Sorry, I'm not big rivals with Winchester, of course, but hopefully I'm glad we could look beyond that and be civil here today. So went to Woburn High, but then went off to college, went to Harvard undergrad, lived in Kentucky for 5 years, and then as much as I enjoyed that, I wanted to get back to this area. And so I wound up, after a few years back in the general area, my wife and I bought a home in Woburn. So I came back to Woburn, which is very interesting. I didn't really necessarily plan to do that, but kind of reconnecting with the community I grew up with really had me thinking pretty deeply about sort of how the community had changed and evolved since I went to high school. And I was already working in the nonprofit sector, so I started getting very interested in bringing some of the concepts I had from my day job, as it were, to community work. And so it was kind of that coming back home to Woburn. And then, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the concept of social capital. But I guess the other piece I will add is, as I was thinking and observing how the community had changed, I also read a book called Bowling Alone, which is really talks a lot about social capital and the decline of that idea in American communities over the last part of the 20th century. And so I kind of had the seed of an idea of trying to work on some of those issues in my local community.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So you mentioned a lot about community and social networking. How is that important to social capital?
Yeah, so the way those things tie together, as I see it, is they're very similar and interconnected. So I guess the way I would put it is, in a healthy, thriving community, there are a lot of connections, but a lot of people know one another and trust one another. And that's another concept that's kind of foundational to social capital. The idea of we live in the same neighborhood, we see each other, maybe go to the same coffee shop, you start developing a sense, okay, you might be a different age, different background, but at the end of the day, we share a neighborhood, we share a community. You start building a connection, a relationship that, starts to build a sense of social capital. And that is, we view it, social capital is really key for strengthening communities, because in communities where people trust one another and feel like they have relationships that make them feel they belong in the community, that really is good both to the individual and the community as a whole.
What has social capital done so far to uplift this idea of a social network?
Yeah, sure. A lot of things. We really, one of the things we do, our tagline is cultivating connections. So one of the things, it's interesting, ever since we started, sometimes when we start talking about social networks, sometimes, and when we were starting was around the early days of some of the things like Facebook and stuff like that. So, and there was the movie, The Social Network, you might have heard of. So sometimes people think of that like the, being on a social network platform online. But really for us, we would often talk about early on, some of the things we would do was have a community calendar where we would say we were trying to put things on people's screens that get them off their screens, that get out into the community. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing, just in terms of building a social network that involves real relationships in community, is really kind of what we say is really putting relationship building at the center of what we do. So we do a lot of different projects, and sometimes people see all the different things we do, and sometimes if they haven't heard the whole story, don't get how it all hangs together, because they're the things we do to address different issues. But it is really at the core. Anytime we're doing stuff, we really focus on those building relationships so that people are getting to know people, who they didn't know previously or strengthening a relationship that they've already had.
Yes, and one of the things Social Capital does is you guys have a youth empowerment programs, like you have the grants and you have multiple different things. Why do you think youth leaders and youth innovators are important?
Yeah, well, certainly, it's probably not rocket science. The idea, if you want to make long-term impact, focusing at least a good amount of energy on young people and young leaders makes a lot of sense. That's, I think, foundational to it. Another thing, going back to the book, I'm sorry, I have to cite the Bowling Alone. One of the other things, why we focused on youth programming right from the get-go was that when the author of this book, Bowling Alone, Professor Robert Putnam, talked about why there's a decline of social capital, one of the key ideas was that there seemed to be a drop. If you look generation to generation, like, you've probably heard the term the Great Generation, folks that sort of, were raised in the Depression and World War II, that the Great Generation was like the most inclined to get involved in their community, most civically active. And then every generation after that, the numbers went down, down, down. So it was like, to reverse the trend, okay, we have to figure out how to pass on and teach and encourage those kind of civic habits of how you get involved in your community and make a difference.
Yes. Can you tell us about some programs that you run to help promote this?
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned, you referenced the grant program. So it's called the Youth Grant Pitch Contest, and that's something we're right in the season for it right now. It's definitely grown into one of our signature programs. The way it works is we have teams of young people. This year we have 15 teams of youth from across Greater Boston, including one from Winchester, a couple from Woburn, others from like Boston, Cambridge, Wilmington, all kinds of towns in the area. But each team comes to us with like an initial idea for a community project. Some, already have a fairly good idea what they want to do. Others, maybe it's like, I want to do something for the environment or youth mental health. And then what they do is they get matched with a pair of mentors that we call their volunteer coaches, and they meet once a week to work on like coming up with a pitch deck and a real full plan for their community project. And then on April 5th, they will present their ideas to a panel of judges, and the ones that do a good job will have a chance to receive funding to then implement their project.
And if you were a youth yourself right now, how do you think you would benefit from this contest?
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I think many ways. One is there's a lot of value to having a mentor, and in particular, some mentoring programs are like about a long-term relationship over time. This is a little more focused on it's shorter term, 2 months, but really helping pass on some concrete skills that, you need to be successful in business or running a nonprofit, skills like developing a budget, developing a community outreach plan, developing a pitch deck, and presenting, public speaking skills. There aren't many jobs where public speaking skills aren't going to come in handy at some point. So it's the other thing I think about it, there are other programs where you can get some of those experiences, but not to knock your classes, but when you're doing it for a class, you're doing it for the grade, but maybe then you're just moving on to the next thing. But in this case, you're doing it with a chance to actually, it's not just for the grade, it's for a chance to win this money and actually do something in the community. So it sort of makes it more real in a sense, like, okay, if we do a good job, we can get resources to implement the vision we have as a group.
Yeah, and seeing it from a less academic point of view and having it be self-motivated.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And it's also, certainly, and it also builds entrepreneurial skills, and I think we've definitely attracted a lot of our coaches come from sort of entrepreneurial backgrounds, or, we get a good mix of coaches. Some are successful entrepreneurs, others might be more like business executive, lawyers, nonprofit professionals, but, that kind of exposure also to adults that have been successful in different phases, any chance you have to do that, that's a great opportunity, I think, for developing as a young person.
So when you see these young people do this process, innovate and create their own ideas, has it ever inspired you or changed your point of view?
That's a great, it's definitely very inspiring, first of all. Like when the last couple of years, we've had this program, the pitch event, as we call it, at Microsoft in Cambridge, the building lovingly known as the Nerd Center. And just like seeing the energy of, just like probably a couple hundred people wind up being in the space, kids are excited about pitching their ideas, and it's just really infectious. And also just, and really and I and others have just been so impressed by like the thoughtfulness and thoughtfulness of the ideas, creativity of the ideas, and and just like how professional that they wind up being. And I think, one thing that's really cool about that is I think, not changing a point of view, but definitely it's a source of inspiration. It's sort of a thing that, as you progress in life, in your career, it's sometimes easy to get, you start worrying about things like paying the mortgage or paying your kids' college, and you find a lot of reason. It's easy to start building up reasons not to do something different, not to take a risk. And so obviously people who are successful entrepreneurs get over that, but I think there's something intrinsic of the idealism of young people, especially that are attracted to a program like this, that is definitely inspiring. So it's definitely infectious, and I think, I'd say I don't know if any of the adults leaving that event don't leave pretty inspired and hopeful too. I think we definitely can benefit from sources of hope anytime, but certainly these days.
Yes.
Yeah, for the future.
Yeah.
It's like, where they're headed.
Yeah.
So another value of social capital is inclusivity, and you have a program called Allyship Spotlight, where you focus on learning and being a good supporter.
Yeah.
So in one sentence, can you tell me what you think a good allyship is?
Yeah, in one sentence, that's good. Good question. I'd say it's like being someone that's willing to be supportive and empathetic to people who are from different backgrounds and might face discrimination or other forms of challenges or roadblocks to doing what they want to do.
And some people would argue that allyship is like a natural, innate, sympathetic trait that people have. Why is it so important to have a allyship program?
That's a good question. I mean, at many levels, but I think sometimes people have good intention. There's sometimes a gap between like having good intentions, like, I want to be open-minded, I want to be supportive of people from different backgrounds, but like, how do I really show up and do that in a way that's effective? And, that can be, and part of it is, part of what our allyship curriculum gets into is like how to, trying to create spaces to have honest conversations. Because I think sometimes something that we start avoiding, honest conversations by, because I might say the wrong thing, I might offend. And so a lot of what our allyship, that curriculum that you're referencing does is tries to create a space where people can have those honest conversations and feel like they leave there with some tools to do that. And, the other thing I would say is that's sort of what that program does kind of more broadly. I think another thing about allyship is like just kind of like showing up for people who need support. And so, I can think of an example when it was going back a few years, where there were terrible murders of in the Atlanta area of folks. I think they are all 100% of some kind of AAPI background, and so like we started having conversations about how do we show up and support the Asian American community in this area. So we wound up coordinating like a big vigil in support, to show that there was a big groundswell of support. People from all different backgrounds wanted to sort of feel like we have the back of this group of people that might feel especially targeted at this time. So, there's like that allyship, there's that program where we had create the space, but then there's like, what do we do over time to, both as individuals to be allies, but how can an organization that has a respect in the community show up as an ally for different groups?
So the allyship program is really just using that innate ability and improving it so we can be the most effective when we are allies.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. Good summary.
So you were talking about AAPI. So that would extend to like easing discrimination, right?
Yeah, definitely. And to some extent, that was definitely like trying to raise, like that event in particular is trying to raise awareness about the extent to which there's discrimination against people of Asian American background, and including, you know, trying to burst some stereotypes and stuff like that, you know, and so like part of that program was about, you know, I think there's sort of like some forms of discrimination. There are obviously people intentionally being bad actors and racist or what have you, but I mean, I think a lot of what we do is probably a little more, and there are great organizations that do important work that are really kind of maybe trying to get at some of those more intentional bad actions, you know, the really terrible stuff. Not to say, and I think a lot of our programming is more about, you know, trying to get at the situations that maybe are the inadvertent, you know, people that might not even be thinking or realizing that they're saying something that's really a microaggression or things like that, trying to raise awareness to lower, you know, lower acts of discrimination and also create, you know, more welcoming environments, both, you know, in organizations and in the community as a whole.
Are there like other programs that Social Capital runs to help with discrimination?
Yeah, I mean, we do. So we have you mentioned allyship, but we have a broader curriculum that's really about creating helping leaders, young leaders. So like whether it's be through our pitch contest or through our AmeriCorps program, develop skills for creating inclusive environments. Our AmeriCorps fellows do a lot of service, helping young people at different places like Boys and Girls Clubs and teen centers in the area. And so we have a lot of training material that tries to help people be effective about creating safe and welcoming spaces. Yeah, so it's almost like we're less like fighting discrimination directly, but more creating an environment where it's less likely to happen and creating more comfortable, welcoming environments. You know, there's a lot of you know, and another theme we use a lot that's sort of adjacent to the concept of fighting discrimination is about bridge building. Like, how do we create connections across differences, you know, within our communities?
Yeah. So, like, what were the first steps you took to create that program then?
With the correct trainings? Yeah, so that's a good question. So we've always done different kinds of trainings, you know, and to some extent it evolved over the years, but it really was the initiative of, so we have a deputy director, his name is Phil Gordon, and he really took the lead on, in his role, he's kind of managing our team that runs our AmeriCorps programming. So he really took the lead on, you know, kind of working with, you know, getting some input from me, getting some input from others in our organization who have done trainings in the past, and so had a lot of knowledge of some of the things we've done over the years in our heads, and like, how do you translate that to training curriculum. And then we also partnered with Merrimack College and got some of their faculty involved in helping. So like we did an initial version of our curriculum and then got feedback and additions from professors at Merrimack College in their education school. So their whole expertise is like good, you know, training for adult learning and stuff like that. So it's kind of like taking you know, our know-how and then how do you package it up? Because one challenge, you know, when you're, you know, kind of an entrepreneurial type, sometimes you kind of have a lot of information and ideas of like, you know, especially I've been doing it for over 20 years, like it's in your head. Yeah. So sometimes it helps to have somebody else that's coming in, maybe a little newer, is like, okay, how do we really put this together in a framework so we can teach others? Because we feel like, and actually that's our direction moving forward, is we're placing a lot of emphasis on the more we can teach skills of how we bring people together in communities and share that knowledge, the more we can achieve our ultimate mission.
Exactly.
I also know like there's an event for Juneteenth. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure, yeah, that's great. We have been doing Juneteenth in Woburn since 2021. And yeah, it's great. Obviously, it was actually turned out we didn't plan it this way, but it was around the same time it started becoming a federal holiday, which they weren't directly connected, but you know, it started as a small event, and I think it actually started with our board chair, Jennifer Jones, had this idea of like, starting to get, Juneteenth was starting to get out there, especially like as people, the so-called racial reckoning that happened in 2020. I think a lot of people wanted to say, what can we do to be more supportive, be allies? It seemed like the Juneteenth event was a good time to celebrate African American culture and raise awareness about an event that a lot of people didn't know about. I knew a little bit. I had some friends and colleagues that were involved and would tell me about the Juneteenth event that happens every year in Franklin Park in Boston, but there wasn't a lot of that kind of activity here in the suburbs. So for us, it was a great chance to help pull together a new event that can be another opportunity to build a sense of community. And so Jennifer, our board chair, had the idea, and then again, I mentioned earlier my colleague Phil Gordon. He's African American himself, so he was a natural person to lead, kind of organizing the event. And then we also partnered. Important to a lot of our work is done through partnerships. So there's a church in Woburn called St. John's Baptist Church that's primarily African American in its congregation. So they were a partner, as well as our library and some other organizations. So we got it going, and it was started with somebody had the idea, but then, we were in position to bring different organizations and volunteers together to bring it to fruition. So it's grown to be a very successful event. Even there was one year, it was pouring rain like nothing, and we did not have a rain date. We had the Attorney General Andrea Campbell come out. We had a tent for the speakers, but if you're in the crowd, you had to either have a slicker or an umbrella. But
I saw the photos online.
yeah. So that was interesting. We had better weather last year, so
really ensuring everybody who needs to be included in this event, would you say was the most critical part of hosting such a large event and such an important event like Juneteenth? Yeah,
definitely getting buy-in, getting key partners, not trying to do things yourself. That's always a big thing.
Getting input.
That's always important for us, and that helps get support, because then people, we talked earlier about social networks. So part of, it's interesting, for us, strengthening social networks in the community is both an ultimate goal of ours, but it's also a means to the goal. We are trying to be, savvy or smart about how to tap different social networks in the community. So, if you want to have a lot of people at a community event, you think about, okay, who can help get, who can help young people out? Okay, maybe we can partner with some student clubs at the high school. And how can we get, make it be accessible to older folks? Okay, maybe we can work with the senior center to, see if they can have some transportation to the event and things like that.
Make sure it was accessible to everyone who needed to be there that day.
Definitely,
What are some events that, some activities that are in the event?
Yeah, so let's see. It's we've played with the formula a little over the years. Last year's theme was kind of it's trying to make it just more fun and celebratory, and not just I think the first couple of years we were a little more focused on the educational piece because it was so new. So last year was a little bit more it was this block party theme. So we had food and vendors and stuff, certainly trying to uplift Black owned businesses and that sort of thing. The past years we had actually a cool program. We had a Tuskegee, somebody was a Tuskegee Airman come and speak. So sort of telling some, learning different things about African American history with people who really had some expertise like that. So another big partner, I can't remember if I said it, I may or may not have, but the library, we hold it near the Woburn Public Library. And so part of with their partnership, some of the activities are outside, but then some of the more educational things are held within the library. And then they would set up displays throughout the month of June, books that suggested reading. So that's a great partnership with them on that.
And during COVID years, you guys had your vaccine equity. You guys posted different articles about where to get your vaccines. There was articles about women's health and then elders' health. Why is vaccine equity so important back then, and why is it so important now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reason we came to, one of our key concepts is always how we want to have our whole community thrive, everybody, but realistically, we also recognize some people don't have equal access to certain resources or certain information in this case. So when we heard an opportunity to get funding from the CDC to run a vaccine equity project, we thought we could design something that would leverage our skills and strengths, which you mentioned the stuff we posted online. That was part of it, but really the core of the model was like training grassroots community folks who had connections within different immigrant communities and other communities that were kind of getting hit particularly hard by COVID, because a lot of, folks who had higher proportions of like frontline workers that couldn't work from home and stuff like that. So we want to make sure people like that, had the real information and the access to get the COVID vaccine. I think, now I know it's a little more of a struggle to get people to get their COVID vaccine, but you might recall in the early days, everybody was so eager to get their shot. But, somebody, if they didn't speak English, or maybe we're a little intimidated by the medical system. Some cultures are coming from places where maybe they're less trusting of
Western
Western medicine, or just information coming from sources that they don't trust. So part of we were trying to be set a network, create a network of trusted sources of information so that people feel comfortable getting the vaccine. So most of it was outreach. So we had like a team of, we called them VEEP leaders that would work in different communities. So that was in Woburn, as well as some communities in like the Lynn, Everett, Malden area. And they would do a lot of outreach, a lot of like, connecting with pastors at churches. If a pastor says it's okay, maybe more trusted in some communities than the mayor saying it. No offense to our mayors. So that was part of it. And then we did also do a couple of vaccine clinics. I think someone around, we still have the signs from them, because one of the things we found, like Woburn did a good job of trying to set up some clinics for people to get their COVID vaccines, but you had to sign up online, and the forms are complicated and in English. So we did a couple clinics at a church, which again is a different vibe for folks. And at each of those clinics we ran, we partnered with a local doctor, and he brought in Tufts Medical School students who got to practice giving shots. I got one of my booster shots at one of those clinics, so I got to help a future medical or a future doctor get some practice. But we also had translators. Like when we did that, we had translation into 4 different languages. So that really helped. So again, it was a project that helped, create access and access once people are convinced they wanted to get the shot. But a lot of it was the education. That's like what you saw online. But a lot of pounding the pavement and going to speak at different community venues too.
I feel like you could really see just how much you guys were trying to make everything inclusive, because when I visited those past articles, I was able to see so many language options. And it's like saving vaccines saves lives, and it's just like a ton of different languages. So I was just like, oh wow. We got some resources from the CDC and our funding partner, the Community Catalyst, for that. But also, we had to put resources in our project in the area of the communities we're serving. Some communities, I think that we were part of a national initiative, and a lot of our other grantees in other states were kind of focused on like one, translating to Spanish. But really in this area, that's not sufficient. You need to be talking about 3 or 4 or 5 languages to really be creating real access.
So diverse here. How did
just to make sure everyone is included.
Right.
How did that help or kind of like push social capital forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've done things off and on that, certainly, we talked about Juneteenth, but we had done an event before called World Fest, where we partnered with a local international learning center, which teaches English as a second language. So we've definitely done different work, connecting with and supporting the immigrant community over time. But this was a kind of a more intensive engagement. It wound up being one of the initial VEEP leaders, the first person that ran our project for the first year of the grant was fresh hire out of Princeton, not an immigrant, but he went on to take another job, and then we were able to bring in one of those VP leaders that was kind of doing like 10 or 15 hours, getting a little stipend, and actually hired her to run the project. And she's been amazing. Her name's Vitaly Mimius, and she is, and so she's Haitian American, and so was able to really connect with at another level with, you know, especially the Haitian community, but even just other immigrant communities too. I think just from having that, you know, shared experience and understanding, you know, some similarities, like I know in Haitian culture, and she would explain, you know, connecting through pastors is important, but that's true in some other communities as well, other immigrant communities as well. So that really got us, I think, more connections and capacity to do a lot with the immigrant community, and we've continued with some other initiatives recently.
Were there like programs that you ran for migrants and immigrants and that whole community?
Yeah, so what happened was that got us into the next wave of things was when, as Vitaly was doing outreach in those different communities I mentioned, it was now summer, I guess, of 2023 that large numbers of immigrants were coming to Massachusetts and starting to need to be put up in different emergency shelter situations, which of course has been in the news a lot. And it was interesting because she was asked to initially just as a partner to go and do the vaccine outreach stuff, you know, education, helping people get vaccinated and get that taken care of. So, and we also would educate about wearing masks and using. We've still got our hand sanitizer back there still. Yeah. So she was going there and doing that to help these new arrivals from from Haiti that were staying in like Chelsea and Everett. And lo and behold, she didn't know 2 weeks later it was going to be like 200 families here in the Woburn area hotels staying, and all of a sudden we were very much thrust into, and she in particular, a key role trying to support those folks, because there were several months before. Now there are a couple nonprofits, Housing Families is the biggest one that kind of, that's their thing, is running shelter programs. But there were a couple months when that wasn't there, and so it was like just a lot of kind of just volunteers from the community providing meals, doing clothing donations. So there were a lot of, it was really encouraging to see how many people in the Woburn community and Winchester as well. There were great partnerships with like some church groups, some civic groups in Winchester that were great. Did great. They did a big soccer game for the folks. Especially as time went on, the first few weeks I was referring to as like people needed the basics, and when you have the basics, then you just say, okay, how can we start doing some other things so folks feel welcome. So that really evolved, and we continue. Part of our thing, one of our strategies has been sometimes they're like, we have some flexibility given we're just ultimately how to get people more connected, more, more a part of the community. So we can adapt, where the needs are greatest, where our approach can have impact. So, as the basics were being met, we have evolved into other things. So like last summer we wound up doing we did a big focus on.
Sorry.
Continuing.
Yeah.
He's deaf in
Gotcha.
his ear, so he doesn't realize when his phone is on.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Gotcha. Okay, no worries. So the I was just saying, like, so the needs have evolved. Like last summer, we put a lot of focus on to helping both teens and younger kids get into summer programs. The ones staying in the hotels. So that was great. So the older kids went to the Boys and Girls Club, the teens, and then the younger ones going to the camp at the YMCA. But all the camps, because they are regulated by the state, have a lot of paperwork involved, which isn't the easiest thing in the world if you're a recent immigrant that came to the country with your life possessions in one backpack. You don't have all your documentation for signing up for summer camp. So Vitaly and others involved in the process helped get those kids
into the community.
Yeah, exactly.
Has it, like, in your duration of helping immigrants and migrants, has it always like been consistent, or were there times that were more harder than others?
Well, certainly I would say, we it's certainly been harder in the immigrant community, I think, when, national rhetoric has been essentially, frankly, anti-immigrant in nature, and it creates a lot of fear. So we're definitely seeing a lot of that now, and that's challenging, very challenging. So, I think in going back to, 2016, 2017, so what's been happening recently isn't entirely new. I think we did try to do things back then as well as now to help provide some reassurance to people. Because one of the challenges is, like, if people start getting fearful, maybe they stop sending their kids to school, or they don't call the police or fire department if there's an emergency, if they think somehow that's going to get them into trouble. So trying to help, some of the fear is frankly valid, it's not like,
Totally.
but then, it can get to an extreme. So, like, helping people feel as comfortable as they possibly can, and at least also know that, there are a lot of people in the community, and I think, Woburn and Winchester, we have definitely seen through this, even, since we've had this upsurge in the migrant population in this area, we've definitely seen a lot of people eager to be supportive.
And help them, get them a safety net and reassurance. So to ease that mental
Right.
load. What do you think is the most important relationship you made so far with helping Haitian migrants?
Oh, that would probably be having someone on our team who's,
Yes.
who is, originally from Haiti herself and can resonate. I mean, not, sometimes in nonprofit organizations, we don't have the luxury or don't have
The resources.
To have somebody on your team that really has that next level of being able to identify and connect. We have a great team, everybody, we have 8 staff who are all wonderful, very dedicated to strengthening communities, and very, we have our values posted somewhere all about, creating a welcoming, inclusive environment in our communities. But somebody who's from that culture, who's had that immigrant experience, I mean, not quite the same, everybody has their own story and journey, but she could really relate in a different way. So that's probably surely been the biggest connection. I would say the second thing I would shout out there was a great committee of people that volunteered their time, especially early on when the numbers really started rising quickly and before all the infrastructure is in place. And there's a United Methodist Church here in Woburn. Pastor Bill, give him a shout out too. And there was a great group of people, but also having a physical, we're not big, they have bigger facilities, they have like places, meals could be cooked for folks, they had a place to store donations, so they were definitely, definitely worth mentioning too. And I think one of the things that I think was also helpful in that dynamic was people said, okay, we can work together, let's figure out what we can do, but also respect that there was a battalion, there were a couple other volunteers, Haitian volunteers, that also, I think the committee, people who are not Haitian sort of realized the limits of what they could do and tried to kind of stay in our lanes. What can we do to be helpful, and where do we really need to rely on the expertise of somebody that speaks their language? Yeah, good point. Yeah, totally.
And we can talk about some of the history of you starting social capital. So my question is, what do you think was the most critical failure you had that was critical to the success of social capital?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Most critical failure. I guess if you learn from your failures, is it really a failure? But let me think. I mean, one thing I would say is failure per se, something we didn't do as well, I guess the way to put it, like when there was the economic downturn in like 2008, 2009, it was very challenging, there was a big drop in donations available, we rely on, both foundations and individual giving, and so, when it looked like the world economy was just going down the drain, it was a very hard time, and from that experience, there were some things we did. At the end of the day, we've been talking about all the services we do, but a nonprofit organization still has to take in at least as much money as we're putting out, or you're not going to be in business very long. So there's certain things I think keeping our eyes on that. I learned from that some things about like when COVID hit, that obviously, the economy shut down for a while. So I feel like I learned some things about like, okay, we really need to be on top of knowing what resources are available, because it's going to be tough. We might not get this or that donation, might have trouble. So it's like, how do we really make sure we're able to keep serving the community by also taking care of some of the financial underpinnings of our work? And so I feel like from having struggled through that and just barely made it through that period of time, and so 08, 09, and a couple of years thereafter, I feel like we were on top of doing what we needed to do to, thrive and really meet the moment. That certainly, still, I feel like it hasn't really stopped, but it's evolved into new needs. But certainly, 2020, 21, there are just so many huge needs. So I felt like we were in position to had a solid base and more prepared, to run strong programming during that time.
What did you do before you did social capital that you think was also just taught you a critical skill that helped you build social capital to what it is today?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So I probably the experience. So I was involved not too long after college when I was in Kentucky. The AmeriCorps National Service Program was just percolating as an idea, and so I was involved in helping start the AmeriCorps program. It's a little bit the national program, but really was leading the effort in Kentucky, and so that experience gave me a lot of experience both in terms of starting a new initiative and also needing to get support from, and I was, I didn't sound like your typical Kentuckian, so I had to figure out how to go around I had to do facilitated hearings around the state for the governor's office on to help develop our plan for AmeriCorps, and really had to connect with all kinds of people from, retired coal miners to big corporate executives and stuff. So that was good in working with political leaders as well. So that was a great foundational experience that I think really helped give me a nice base to, lead a nonprofit and start it.
Gaining the skill set to help other people attain skill sets.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it definitely takes a lot of skills and always learning to run a nonprofit organization like any business.
I guess my next question, also pertaining to your experience, would be, what was the pivotal moment that you knew this is what you wanted to do, that you wanted to work on creating a social network, creating social capital, and really building this community up in the greater Boston area? Yeah,
sure. Well, there are a couple answers, Seth. The first was, I've mentioned a couple times. So this book, Bowling Alone, I finished reading this book. I read the last chapter on a flight to San Francisco. I was going to a conference, and if you read, and if you go off to college, you read academic books, they tend to be a little more weighted toward defining the problem and telling you all the things that are wrong. The final chapter of that book was, all right, starting to get to solutions. How do we build community? And he basically said, America's had times like this before. He cited the progressive era when things like, YMCA's, Rotary clubs, so many institutions were born in that progressive era. And basically said, we need people to be entrepreneurial and figure out how to build community again. I was like, yes, that's me. I was I felt like Bob Putnam was sitting there next to me on the plane, talking to me. I was like, he's talking to me. I got this. and I was literally ready to jump out of the plane and get going, but I waited till it landed. But then the second thing that I think reinforced it, that's one thing to have a moment of, kind of an epiphany type moment. But then as I started talking about the idea of working on this problem, it just really resonated with so many people. That encouraged me that I was on the right track. Because people said, and especially when I got to not need 30 minutes to explain all the arguments of the book, but I could for a few minutes, get people thinking, especially if they're old enough to remember neighborhoods that were a little more cohesive, where people were more likely to know each other and, be connected. People say, oh yeah, I remember those times. I would love to be involved in sort of bringing that kind of strong community back.
Yeah. Do you remember what book title?
Yeah, so the book is called Bowling Alone.
Okay.
I'm sure we have a copy, so I'm looking at our bookshelf. It's got to be kicking around here somewhere. We have our shelf copy, and then there's the one that is all marked up because I'm always citing it.
It's all annotated and it's all nice.
Yeah, and there's certainly some newer works on. But anyway, yeah. So that was sort of some of the early moments when I
So having that book and seeing community responses pushed you into social capital and starting it. What pushes you to continue doing what you do?
Oh, that's a great question. I think a couple of things. One is the mission is broad enough that we wind up kind of evolving to meet the new needs as they emerge, and that keeps things fresh and interesting, for sure. I'm getting at 3 reasons. So that's number one, the fact that we evolve and it's always evolving, so it's always interesting. Number two, one thing I really enjoy about is this kind of dual role, like having some of what we do is right here in Woburn, my community that I grew up in, I raised our son here, you live here. That feels great to have that tangible impact where I live. But also I really enjoy the fact that we are serving the broader Greater Boston community and feeling like we're contributing to what I think is a really pressing national issue ultimately. So this kind of balance between local impact, but really speaking to a bigger issue, right? Exactly. And third, we have a great team and great network of folks that engage with and support our work, and I couldn't do it without that. And that keeps it. It makes it possible to do what we do, and B, it makes it more fun and enjoyable. Just being able to work with people that might have a lot of different interests and backgrounds, but share a common goal to work with SCI to build stronger, more inclusive communities.
Yeah. When you think about everything you've done in social capital, how would you summarize why this type of program needs to continue, needs to spread? And also you talked about how this issue was a national issue. I think this also is really global right now. Why do you think programs like SCI needs to spread?
Sure. It's interesting, I keep citing this book that's now over 20 years old, but I'm going to get more current. So the Surgeon General under both President Obama and Biden, Dr. Vivek Murthy, put out something in 2023 saying that loneliness is a major epidemic in the United States, talking about roughly a third of the American population identifies as being lonely or isolated in some fashion. There's huge health implications. So I think there are these public health, it can really be seen underlying a lot of health and both mental and physical health issues. But I also think this social disconnect we face, as it's become easier for people to, if they are connected, they're connecting in echo chambers with people that maybe share their views, similar backgrounds, similar political views. That's not the American idea. That's not how democracy is supposed to work. So ultimately, I think why it's so important now is both for our individual well-being, we need to be connected. You said it's global too. Yes, it definitely is. The happiest nations on earth tend to have strong social ties. We need it as humans, and we're not going to find that meaning and connection through our devices or AI. It's got to come through real relationships. We need it for our individuals, but I argue that for healthy democracy to thrive in the long term, we need people who have the ability to connect across differences and work on the common problems we face, and we face a few. So that is definitely why we need more of what we're trying to do here.
It's strange how after we got access to technology and had more possibility to connect, we are less connected.
Yeah, that's very true.
It's a bit. It almost sounds wrong.
Yeah, it is, and I think, thinking around, I think there were, tech utopians early on, thinking that, oh, this internet thing, it's going to be,
Replacing
it's
human
going to
connections.
make people so connected, and clearly there are some advantages. I like the way I'm able to feel like I'm able to stay in touch a little bit with some like college friends that don't live in the area and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it does not replace, the physical connections. And I think there's a ton of evidence to support that. And I think, it's, that there's some good evidence, I think, obviously I probably don't need to tell you that there's a lot of concern about youth mental health, and there's a lot of data, I think, that, shows a pretty close correlation between the timing of like when most teens start having smartphones in their pocket and the rise in mental health issues, kind of correlate very closely on those graphs and stuff like that. So yes, clearly, obviously, if these devices and the ability to connect online didn't do anything for us, we wouldn't be having the conversation. But it's obviously, in some short-term way, provides that little rush or the pings that yes, that's what I was looking for. Yeah, exactly. But it clearly is not the kind of same kind of value you get from sustained, relationships with people over time.
What is an aspiration you have for yourself, and then what is an aspiration you hope that social capital will achieve?
Cool. Let's see. I can do the SCI aspiration first. It'll buy me some time on the next one. So we actually just launched a new strategic plan, and our big goal is to create a network of 1,000 social capital cultivators, we're calling them, and that's basically would include like the teens that are doing our youth grand pitch contest, other people that raise their hand, say, I want to do something like what SCI is doing in my neighborhood, and we support them and connect them with tools and resources to do that. And then we are trying to, those are people we'll work really closely with, and then we want to create a broader network of like 5,000. Our goal is social capital leaders who are really signing on to connect with us and support the development of these social capital rising leaders, essentially. So that's our big goal, is like, and I guess that's our specific goals, but bigger picture, I think what we're really trying to contribute in an important way to this national challenge. So not necessarily going to like set up SEIs all over the country, but adding to the conversation, showing some models and inspiring people to say, oh, I see what they're doing, and the Greater Boston area through SCI, I want to do that.
Yeah, just building SCI-like connections where they're from.
Yeah.
Expanding that greater idea you guys have with social networks and community.
Yeah.
What are your next steps to achieve that goal?
Oh, great question. So we are a couple things. We are working on, we're going to need to raise some more funds, so we're working on a big like fundraising campaign. We're also so we're kind of working on thinking of what doing some restructuring and adding new staff positions that would help. One of our top priorities right over the next in 2025 is to really roll out a new strategy for it. We've always thought about people conceived of anyone who volunteered first, donated, participated in our events as being part of the quote-unquote SCI network, but it wasn't really a tangible thing. So we're trying to solidify that, and ironically, we're just talking about the downsides of technology, and what we see that is including a tech platform where people, I mentioned this earlier, say, oh, you do volunteers raking first senior citizens, I want to do that in my neighborhood. Putting that up, making it, having resources through our network where people can do that on their own, but a lot of in-person connectivity, even more than we're already doing, in addition to running events, but like really where people are sharing ideas, people who are in this goal with us of building community, strengthening community, where chance for the people to connect, share ideas, work and foster collaboration, kind of weaving, sometimes if you think of a good strong social network is like a spider web, it's like, success for us isn't just like we have all these connections like the spokes on a bike, out to these different people and organizations, but that we're really weaving them together, to create a stronger web.
Yes, you're just bonding everyone together.
Right.
So after everything you've gone through, and everything that social capital has gone through, what is one piece of advice that you would give to baby social capital or younger self of you that you think he should know or they should know if they're talking?
One piece of advice. Okay. I would say if you have an idea that you're excited about, that other people respond to, that seem excited, go for it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people sometimes get scared about taking that step. And it doesn't mean you need to quit your day job if you have a job, or drop out of school if you're in school because you have a brainstorm in the middle of the night. You know, and part of why I say, you know, if you have an idea, it's not necessarily just run with it. Like, if you've got it solid enough that it's you share it with people and they're responding to it, there's probably something there, and try to go with it, I would say. And the one, a follow-up little sidebar, because I get asked this a lot, you know, a lot of people who are at that place of wanting to start nonprofits, I would say that doesn't necessarily mean go out and figure out how to incorporate a nonprofit organization. I mean, you know, if you have an idea, try it out, find a way to test it out, you know, and you know, build. That's the other, I mean, it's sort of related to that. It's like, part of our success early on, I think, was like, we didn't have to wait till we had everything figured out. We didn't wait till we had all the money in the world raised. We still don't have all the money in the world, of course. We didn't wait till we had a significant amount of money raised. We started getting out there and showing what we were trying to do, and that built momentum. So I think that's kind of a little bit implicit and embedded in what I was saying, like kind of go for it. It's like don't keep it on the drawing board forever. At the end of the day, you know, you're never going to know if it's really going to be something viable if you're just trying to, you know, make up plans and raise more money. It's like at a certain point you got to get out there and bring your idea into the world. You know, not saying every idea is, of course, not everything's going to fly, but you're never going to really know unless you go out there and give it a try.
So after all your experiences, what do you think is the secret to success?
You know, there's probably no one quote unquote secret. I guess there's for me, you know, and I think I think, you know, I think as time goes on in my career, you know, the idea of leaning into your strengths, but then finding others that sort of complement your strengths is definitely key. So I think for me, you know, both, you know, persistence, you know, plugging away is definitely a trait, you know, as some call that idea of grit. You know, a lot of people, I think successful people, you know, have that stick-to-itiveness to what they want to do, but then also being, like I said, mindful of, and I think part of it's one thing I like about where we are now, we've grown enough, you know, we'd like to grow our team more still, but we're to the point that we definitely have a strong team, so it's not like, you know, it needs to be all me figuring stuff out. I can lean on some strong staff and board members and volunteers to really achieve our goals.
Yeah. And lastly, after everything you've experienced, what is a motto you have for yourself or you think that social capital really represents?
Motto, I didn't make this up, but a favorite quote of mine I think I'll go with is Gandhi's, "We ourselves must be the change we want to see in the world." And part of what I like about that, I think some people just take that as okay, yeah, we got to get out there and make change. But I see that as the change starts with the person you are. Like, don't try to fix the world, you know, and with all the problems, and ignore what, you know, the challenges you have. You know, being a solid, you know, being aware of your own strengths and weaknesses, and always trying to better yourself is going to put you in better position to change the world.
Upholding yourself to the standards you hold the world up to.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, that's really good.
That's true.
Thank you so much for your time and
It was
willingness.
wonderful talking to you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, enjoyed talking with you both. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for your information, all your advice.
Great.
Yeah.
I really like this because you really endeavor in so much with social capital, because there's kind of like a sector branch program for everything. You have the youth, you have helping migrants, the vaccination, you kind of adapt to what the community needs, and I really just kind of love that. Thank you for all.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming.
So much.
Yeah, great. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.